Narrator. What is the ultimate weapon capable of bringing a man of absolute tyrannical power to his knees? Is it a blade forged in hellfire, a magic spell capable of leveling mountains, or perhaps a political scheme so venomous it rots an empire from within? For centuries, we have been force-fed a lie. We have been conditioned to believe that supremacy belongs to those who roar the loudest, to those who bathe in the blood of their enemies. But what if I told you that the single most terrifying force in existence, the only thing capable of forcing a ruthless alpha king, dripping with vengeance and madness, to bow in utter submission, is not a weapon at all? What if I told you it is the chilling, unyielding power of absolute calmness? Welcome to Wolf King Stories. If you are ready to uncover this profound truth, please hit that subscribe button right now to support the channel, fueling our passion to bring you more extraordinary tales like this one. For far too long, our minds have been held hostage by two excruciatingly tiresome female archetypes in literature and film. On one side, we have the fragile, tear-stained maiden, a glass doll waiting to be shattered, whose sole purpose is to be rescued by a towering male savior. We mockingly call her the useless damsel, a mere shadow cast by the male lead's brilliance. On the brutal opposite end of the spectrum, in a desperate bid for forced feminism, society has served us the obnoxiously loud, artificially rebellious heroine. She bristles like a porcupine at every minor inconvenience, picking fights merely to prove she cannot be bullied. Her outward aggression is nothing but a cheap mask hiding a shallow interior. Both tropes are agonizingly dead ends. We crave something violently different, a fresh, profound definition of feminine power. And that is exactly where the concept of absolute calmness steps out of the shadows. To truly comprehend the majesty of this power, we must hurl it into a canvas of the most violent contrasts imaginable. Let us paint the darkest corner of this masterpiece first. Picture a storm roaring with apocalyptic fury. At the dead center of this hurricane stands Gideon Dolores, the Alpha King who holds the supernatural world by its throat. Yet tonight, he is no king sitting upon a velvet throne. He is a monster unleashed in the pitch-black woods, tearing through the freezing, relentless rain. He carries with him a horrifying aura of brutality, madness, and bottomless despair. His only son, the tiny heir he treasures far above his own cursed soul, Soren, has been abducted. The metallic stench of blood, the lingering scent of his enemies, and the throat-tearing roars of a father cornered by fate create an atmosphere so suffocating it crushes the lungs. Every step Gideon takes obliterates the rotting forest floor. Every breath he exhales is pure, unadulterated murder. This is the image of a sovereign ready to incinerate the globe, willing to drown the earth in blood, just to claw his child back from the abyss. It is the most chaotic, explosive, and darkened state of primitive instinct. Now, violently tear your gaze away and look at the absolute opposite side of the spectrum, a silence so profound it borders on the divine. Hidden deep within the ancient woods, entirely severed from the blood-soaked political theater, sits a decrepit wooden cabin. There are no armed guards, no shimmering magical wards. There is only the flickering amber light of a hearth dancing on smoke-stained walls. Inside, the healer Saphira is working in complete, suffocating silence. The air in this tiny room is thick with the bitter scent of crushed herbs, pine resin, and a fading heartbeat. Upon a rough-hewn wooden table lies a tiny wolf pup, completely paralyzed, its breath so hauntingly shallow it threatens to dissolve into the ether at any given second. Saphira is utterly oblivious to the apocalyptic storm raging outside. More importantly, she does not care. Her hands, stained green and brown with medicinal sap, glide over that tiny, broken body with a terrifying precision, gentle, yet armed with lethal determination. She is wrestling with death himself, ripping a soul back from the underworld, second by agonizing second. There is no screaming, no frantic weeping, just a hyper-focus that radiates a bizarre, almost holy halo of peace. And here lies the most agonizingly brilliant twist of fate, the very genesis of an invincible power. Saphira has absolutely no idea about the royal bloodline flowing through the veins of the dying creature beneath her hands. She does not know this is the son of the Alpha King. She isn't fighting this desperate battle in the hopes of being showered with gold, elevated to power, or to curry favor with a supreme tyrant. She is saving him for one singular, earth-shattering reason. It is a life that deserves to live. This pure political ignorance, this absolute, uncorrupted purity in her motive, forge an impenetrable armor. When you seek no personal gain, when you are not chained down by the paralyzing fear of authority, you achieve the highest pinnacle of spiritual freedom. Saphira doesn't need to prove her worth to a single soul on this earth. And it is precisely this breathtaking indifference, this pure devotion to life itself, that will become the catastrophic shockwave destined to shatter every arrogant defense of the bloodthirsty king currently hurtling toward her door. Narrator. As the storm outside reaches its terrifying crescendo, the fragile wooden door of the cabin is obliterated, shattering the boundary between the king's raging inferno and the healer's silent sanctuary. Gideon Dolores does not simply enter the room, he invades it like a localized apocalypse. Wood splinters fly like shrapnel, and the freezing howling wind rushes in, threatening to extinguish the sole hearth keeping the shadows at bay. He stands there, a towering monolith of muscle, dripping with rainwater and the blood of those who dared stand in his path. His chest heaves, his golden eyes burning with a feral, manic desperation that could melt steel. He is an apex predator who has tracked his stolen bloodline to this miserable shack, fully expecting to find a den of assassins or a cowering peasant waiting to be slaughtered. He parts his lips, a deafening, chest-rattling roar of dominance building in his throat, a sound designed to shatter the very soul of anyone who hears it. But the roar dies before it is ever born. Because Saphira does not scream. She does not drop to her knees and beg for mercy. She does not even flinch. In a world where Gideon's mere shadow causes seasoned warriors to soil themselves in terror, this frail, mud-stained woman does the unthinkable. She entirely ignores him. The monstrous aura of the Alpha King, a pressure so heavy it cracks the floorboards beneath his boots, hits Saphira's absolute stillness and simply evaporates. Without sparing him a single glance, without pausing the intricate, bloody work of her hands over the dying pup, she issues a command. It is not shouted, it is not laced with venom. It is a quiet, exasperated whisper, spoken with the authority of someone entirely consumed by their craft. Saphira, close the door. The draft is lowering his body temperature. Narrator. The psychological whiplash is so violent it physically staggers the Alpha King. His brain, hardwired for warfare and submission, cannot process the data it is receiving. Where is the fear? Where is the groveling? He steps forward, the floor groaning under his immense weight, fully intending to seize this insolent creature by the throat and demand answers. But as his shadow falls over the wooden table, his golden eyes lock onto the tiny, broken form beneath her hands. Soren, his heir, his heart. The pup is practically a corpse, a gruesome tapestry of dark magic and physical trauma. And in that devastating fraction of a second, Gideon realizes the agonizing truth. This fragile woman, whose neck he could snap with a flick of his wrist, is the only barrier standing between his son and the grave. The lethal aggression that has defined his entire existence suddenly feels utterly, pathetically useless. He cannot intimidate death. He cannot order a severed artery to fuse back together. For the first time in a century, the most dangerous man in the world realizes he is entirely outmatched. His violence is a blunt, useless instrument in the face of her terrifying, life-giving precision. It is in that exact, breathless fraction of a second, when a supreme ruler realizes his wrath is impotent, that the axis of power violently and permanently shifts. Gideon freezes, his massive hands trembling, the claws slowly retracting into his knuckles. The intoxicating adrenaline of the hunt drains from his veins, leaving behind nothing but the cold, suffocating terror of a helpless parent. He looks at Saphira, truly looks at her now. He sees the dark bags under her eyes, the sweat matting her hair to her forehead, and the terrifying, robotic rhythm of her hands as she forces life back into his son. She is not operating out of fear of the crown, she doesn't even know who he is. She is operating out of a sacred, terrifying devotion to her duty. If he speaks, he distracts her. If he threatens her, his son dies. The realization crashes over him with the weight of a collapsing mountain. His absolute power, the very foundation of his identity, has been entirely neutralized by her absolute calmness. To demand obedience now would be the ultimate act of foolishness. And so, the tyrant makes a choice that would send shockwaves through the annals of their history. The Alpha King, a man who has forced entire nations to kiss the dirt beneath his boots, slowly, agonizingly, yields. Narrator. His knees buckle. The sound of his armor hitting the wooden floor is a hollow, defeated thud that echoes louder than any war cry he has ever bellowed. He drops to his knees beside the table, not in an act of forced humiliation, but in an act of total, agonizing surrender. He bows his head, the terrifying sovereign reduced to a hollowed-out beggar, silently pleading with a nameless healer for the life of his child. This is the very essence of the contrast we spoke of, the true, profound power of the feminine calm. Saphira hasn't drawn a weapon, she hasn't raised her voice, she hasn't engaged in a toxic battle of egos, or tried to match his masculine aggression with forced, loud rebellion. She simply stood her ground in her own realm of mastery. By remaining entirely anchored in her purpose, unbothered by his monstrous display, she has created a vacuum of power that Gideon's rage cannot survive in. She has essentially starved his fire of oxygen. As he kneels there, watching her work through the blurry curtain of his own unshed tears, the dynamic is firmly established. She is the sovereign of this wooden shack, she is the god of this moment, and he is merely a bystander, entirely at her mercy. The Invincible King has been brought to heel, shattered and rebuilt in the span of a few heartbeats, entirely conquered by a woman who hasn't even bothered to ask for his name. Stripped of his crown and drowning in the unfamiliar waters of vulnerability, the king can do nothing but watch as the true master of this domain goes to war. The healing is not a beautiful, magical spectacle, it is a grueling, visceral trench war against mortality itself. Saphira's cabin transforms into a battlefield far more intense than any Gideon has ever commanded. The air is thick with the scent of copper and the sharp, burning tang of medicinal alcohol. For hours, there is no sound but the frantic, wet gasps of the dying pup and the sharp, rhythmic snap of Saphira's tools. She moves with a terrifying grace, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of survival. Gideon, a man accustomed to barking orders that end thousands of lives, finds himself desperately awaiting her every whispered command to save just one. Saphira. Hold him down, don't let him move. Narrator. She doesn't address him as Your Majesty or Alpha. To her, he is merely an extra pair of hands, a blunt tool to be utilized. Gideon obeys instantly. His massive, scarred hands, capable of crushing boulders, hover over his tiny son with trembling hesitation, terrified of applying too much pressure. Saphira. Hand me that heated blade from the hearth, now. We need to cauterize the dark magic infection. Narrator. Gideon practically leaps to the hearth, thrusting the iron into the coals with a frantic desperation that would be comical if it weren't so deeply tragic. They work in tandem, a bizarre, intimate dance between the harbinger of death and the anchor of life. In this crucible, Gideon witnesses a strength that completely rewrites his understanding of the word. He watches Saphira's brow furrow as a vein ruptures, watches the way she doesn't panic, but simply adapts, her fingers moving faster, her mind calculating 1,000 variables a second. She is absorbing the chaotic, agonizing energy of the room and transmuting it into pure, focused action. She is a fortress of serenity in an ocean of despair. He realizes, with a profound sense of awe, that true bravery is not charging into enemy lines with a battle axe. True bravery is keeping your hand perfectly still while holding a failing heart, knowing that a millimeter of error means the end of a universe. The hours bleed together, stretching into an eternity of bloody rags and whispered prayers, until finally, the moment arrives. Narrator. The sharp, erratic, terrifying gasps of the pup suddenly smooth out. The chaotic flutter beneath Gideon's massive hands settles into a steady, rhythmic thump. A tiny, fragile whimper pierces the heavy silence of the cabin. The war is won. When the agonizing silence is finally broken by the fragile, whimpering cry of a living pup, the very foundation of Gideon's universe is forever rewritten. The king collapses back on his heels, a ragged, ugly sob tearing its way out of his chest, a sound stripped of all majesty, raw and painfully human. He scoops the tiny, bandaged form into his massive chest, burying his face in his son's fur, inhaling the scent of life that he thought was lost to him forever. Only after the torrential wave of relief washes over him does he look up to find the architect of this miracle. Saphira has retreated to a dark corner of the room. She is completely exhausted, leaning against the wooden wall, methodically scrubbing the dried blood from her hands with a rough cloth. She isn't waiting for a parade. She isn't staring at him with expectant eyes, waiting for a chest of gold or a promise of political elevation. In fact, she looks annoyed by the mess left on her table. This staggering, profound indifference hits Gideon harder than any physical blow ever could. In his world, every action is a transaction, every favor a calculated move on a chessboard. But here stands a woman who has just performed a miracle that entire kingdoms could not buy, and she simply wants to wash her hands and go to sleep. She demands nothing from him, and because she demands nothing, she inadvertently claims everything. Her worth is entirely self-contained, utterly independent of his validation. It is in this quiet, smoke-filled room that the Alpha King finally understands the ultimate lie he has been fed his entire life. He had believed that supremacy was the power to destroy, the ability to instill paralyzing fear. But looking at Saphira, he sees the apex predator of a completely different hierarchy. She possesses the supreme godlike power to restore, to look into the jaws of death and calmly say, "No, this one stays with me." She doesn't need to roar to prove her dominance. Her silence commands the universe to bend to her will. This is the narrative we must reclaim. The ultimate feminine power is not found in mimicking the toxic, abrasive aggression of men, nor is it found in weeping until a savior arrives. It is found in the unyielding, terrifying calm of a woman who knows her exact worth. It is the power to stand in the epicenter of a hurricane, facing down the most dangerous tyrant on earth, and bringing him to his knees not with a sword, but with the quiet, devastating force of absolute purpose. Saphira did not just save the life of a royal heir that night, she shattered the ego of a monster, and birthed a true king in his place. And she did it all without ever raising her voice. In this profound encounter, the true nature of power is fundamentally redefined. Gideon, a tyrant accustomed to subjugating the world through fear, violence, and brute force, finds his absolute authority completely neutralized by Saphira's unwavering stillness. She does not engage in a futile battle of egos, nor does she mirror his aggression or cower in submission. Instead, she remains entirely anchored in her purpose and mastery. By prioritizing her life-saving duty over the intimidation of a monstrous king, she creates a power vacuum where his rage simply cannot survive. This narrative masterfully illustrates that supreme dominance does not always manifest as a deafening roar or a drawn sword. Sometimes it is the quiet, unyielding focus of a healer defying death itself. Saphira's profound indifference to Gideon's royal status forces him to shed his ego and surrender, transforming him from a destructive monster into a humbled, genuine king. Ultimately, this story dismantles the illusion that loud, destructive aggression is the apex of control. It reveals that the most devastating and transformative power lies in self-contained worth, absolute calm, and the ability to heal rather than destroy. True sovereignty is born not from demanding reverence, but from mastering one's own domain with such quiet brilliance that the world naturally falls to its knees in respect. True power does not roar, it anchors. The most invincible strength we can cultivate is not the ability to overpower others with aggression, but the capacity to maintain our inner calm and unwavering purpose in the face of absolute chaos. When you are entirely secure in your own worth and deeply committed to your craft, you do not need external validation, nor do you need to engage in toxic power struggles. Unbothered stillness can disarm even the most aggressive forces. In our daily lives, we constantly encounter storms, toxic workplaces, aggressive individuals, high-stress situations, or chaotic interpersonal conflicts. Instead of matching that chaotic energy by raising your voice, arguing, or defending your ego, choose to ground yourself in your purpose. If someone approaches you with misplaced anger or dominance, do not absorb their emotional volatility. Focus entirely on the task at hand and your internal peace. Let your competence, silence, and firm boundaries speak for you. By refusing to feed into their storm, you starve their aggression of oxygen and force them to enter your calm. Master your own realm, know your unshakable worth, and let your focused actions dictate the outcome of any conflict. What is one situation in your life where staying completely calm helped you overcome a difficult challenge or disarm an angry person? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments section below so our community can read and learn from your perspective. If you found value in this story and its lessons, please subscribe to the channel. Your support is our greatest motivation to keep creating and bringing you more high-quality, meaningful content. See you in the next chapter. Narrator. The heavy, suffocating tension that had gripped the cabin for hours begins to dissolve, matching the dying fury of the storm outside. Gideon remains on the floor, his broad shoulders rising and falling with a slow, exhausted rhythm. His eyes never leave his son, Soren, whose steady breathing is now the loudest sound in the small room. The violent tyrant who had entered this sanctuary with a desire to tear the world apart is gone, replaced by a grateful father whose heart has just been stitched back together. Slowly, Gideon forces himself to stand. His armor clanks softly, but this time, the sound carries no threat, only the heavy weight of respect. He turns his gaze toward the dark corner where Saphira stands. She has finished wiping the blood from her hands, her movements unhurried, her expression still as unyielding as stone. She doesn't look at his crown. She doesn't care about the lethal aura that usually makes the bravest alpha warriors tremble. To her, he is just a loud visitor who brought a dying patient to her door. Gideon clears his throat, his voice deep and raspy, stripped of its usual booming authority. Gideon, you have saved the bloodline of the Dolores pack. You have saved my son. Name your price, healer. Gold, land, or the heads of your enemies, it is yours. Narrator. Saphira finally raises her eyes. There is no greed in her gaze, no sudden excitement at the mention of limitless wealth. Instead, she looks at the Alpha King with absolute biting indifference. She folds her cloth carefully and places it on a shelf before answering. Her voice is flat, devoid of any desire to please a king. Saphira, I do not trade lives for crowns, Wolf. I saved the pup because his heart was still beating when he crossed my threshold. Keep your gold. If you want to repay me, take your son and leave my woods before dawn. Your presence attracts too much noise. Narrator. The absolute psychological whiplash strikes Gideon once again. In the supernatural royal court, every smile is a hidden blade, and every favor is a calculated political chess move. He has executed lords for simply looking at him with the wrong expression. Yet here is a peasant woman, wrapped in a faded cloak, telling the most feared alpha king in existence to pack up and get out of her sight. And the worst part? He cannot find a single ounce of anger within himself to punish her insolence. Her quiet, self-contained worth has completely neutralized his ability to rage. Narrator. Before Gideon can respond, the morning silence is brutally shattered. The heavy, synchronized thud of armored boots echoes from the wet forest path. Dozens of high-ranking alpha warriors, the elite royal guard of the Dolores Empire, have finally tracked their king's scent through the storm. They approach the cabin with weapons drawn, their heavy footsteps shaking the rotting forest floor. Inside the cabin, Saphira doesn't panic. She doesn't rush to hide or beg Gideon for protection. She simply reaches for a small, sharp hunting knife on her table, her eyes scanning the broken doorway with the calm calculation of a predator defending her territory. Her composure is terrifying. Royal Guard. Your Majesty, we found you. Drop your weapons and step away from the king, peasant woman, or you will be executed where you stand. Narrator. The elite guards rush into the narrow space, their silver blades gleaming under the dim amber light of the hearth. They surround Saphira, completely misinterpreting the situation. They see a mud-stained healer with a knife, a broken door, and their absolute sovereign standing near a bloody table. But before a single guard can take a step towards Saphira, a terrifying pressure explodes through the room. It doesn't come from the guards, and it certainly doesn't come from Saphira. It comes from Gideon. Gideon, sheathe your blades, right now. Or I will personally tear the throats out of every man in this room. Narrator. The royal guards instantly freeze, their faces turning pale beneath their helmets. The sheer, suffocating dominance of the Alpha King drops the temperature in the room to freezing. The soldiers tremble, quickly dropping to their knees, their weapons hitting the floorboards with a panicked clatter. They have never seen their king this furious, yet this protective of an outsider. Gideon steps between his army and the silent healer. He doesn't look at his men, his golden eyes are fixed on Saphira, ensuring she hasn't been startled by the sudden invasion. But to his profound amazement, her breathing hasn't even changed. She looks at the kneeling army with the same casual annoyance she had for the storm. Gideon turns his head slightly toward his commander, his voice dropping into a dangerous, icy whisper. Gideon, this woman is not a hostage. She is the savior of your future king. From this day forward, her name is law in these woods. If a single hair on her head is harmed, your entire lineage will burn. Do you understand me? Royal Guard. Yes, yes, your Majesty. Forgive our ignorance. Narrator. Gideon turns back to Saphira. He knows he cannot simply leave her here in a broken cabin deep in the woods. The enemies who had abducted Soren will eventually find out that a nameless healer ruined their plans. Her life is now tied to the royal bloodline, whether she likes it or not. The tyrant who once took whatever he wanted by force now finds himself needing to negotiate, to persuade a woman who desires absolutely nothing he owns. He looks down at his sleeping son, then looks back into Saphira's calm, dark eyes. Gideon. The storm has passed, Saphira, but the monsters who hurt my son are still hunting. They will find this cabin, they will find your name. I cannot force you to follow me, nor would I dare try. But my palace has walls that no dark magic can pierce. Come with us. Not as a subject, not as a servant, but as the supreme healer of the Dolores Empire. Command my gold, command my army, but let me keep you safe. Narrator. Saphira looks at the Alpha King, then looks at the tiny, bandaged pup cradled in his massive arms. She looks at the broken door, knowing the peace of her quiet forest has been permanently shattered. A slow, subtle smile plays on the edge of her lips, not a smile of submission, but the smile of a master stepping into a much larger arena. She knows that by entering his world, she isn't becoming his property. She is bringing her absolute wall of silence into a kingdom built on noise and blood. She is going to rewrite their empire from the inside out. She picks up her leather medical kit, slings it over her shoulder, and walks past the kneeling army without giving them a single glance. She stops at the shattered doorway, the morning sun finally breaking through the trees, painting her silhouette in pure gold. She speaks without turning back. Saphira. Your guards are loud, King. Tell them to carry the pup gently. If his stitches tear on the way to your palace, I will make you kneel again. Narrator. Gideon lets out a low, breathless laugh, a sound his men have never heard in their entire lives. He tightly cradles his son and follows her out into the sunlight. The unbreakable Alpha King has met his match, completely conquered not by a blade, but by the quiet, devastating force of a woman who knows her exact worth.